The Silmarillion. Is there any fantasy book that has more of a reputation of being intimidating to first-time readers than The Silmarillion? Okay, yeah, but it's got quite a reputation. People say, it reads like the Bible, or a history book, or something, or there are too many names. How am I supposed to tell the difference between Fingolfin and Finarfin, or whatever? And those are all valid points. Seriously, I'm not disputing any of that. There's a lot of names in here. So if you've ever tried and failed to get through the Silmarillion, or if you've never tried because you thought it might be too tough, then this video is for you, because I've been there. When I first read the Silmarillion, I got to the end, realized I had no idea what had just happened, and had to go back to page 1 and start all over again. So yeah, I know it can be a tough nut to crack. What it boils down to, I think, is that the Silmarillion isn't what people expect. It's like grabbing a glass of Sprite that actually turns out to be water. There's nothing wrong with the water, but you instinctively gag because it's just so unexpected, right? So today, let's reset some of your expectations around the Silmarillion. Let's talk about why you can read and enjoy it, even if you've tried before and haven't gotten through it. In fact, I argue that you can actually start with the Silmarillion even before you read The Lord of the Rings. But anyway, let's get into why it's so intimidating to so many people. I think it comes down to two things: the prose style and the lack of a protagonist. Let's start with the latter. Name a story. Think of any story. Star Wars, or Tron, or The Matrix, or The Three Musketeers, or While You Were Sleeping, whatever, I don't care. It's usually pretty easy to identify your protagonist. You follow them along a story arc, you care about their successes and failures, celebrate their happy ending, or maybe mourn them in the end. Well, frankly, there is no protagonist in the Silmarillion. Well, okay, that's not quite fair. There's actually about 15 of them. But anyway, this is all because of its structure. See, the Silmarillion is not a story. It's not a novel. It's a succession of stories, each with its own protagonist. Well, sometimes. In this way, it is a lot like reading the Bible or a history book, like some people say. So, what you need to do if you pick up the Silmarillion is you need to change your mindset. Yes, it looks and smells just like a novel, but you need to change your mindset from the novel setting to the history setting. And this is an extremely important distinction. Have you ever heard about how Tolkien hated allegory? There's a pretty famous quote in which he said, "I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence." But we need the next sentence to understand what he's getting at. He says, "I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers." So for Tolkien, it's all about applicability. How does this apply to me, to my life? And he thought that history was the best way to get that stuff. So does that mean that he dislikes traditional stories? Certainly not. The guy made an entire career out of studying stories and the languages that they were told in. But I think it's fair to say that given the choice between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on one hand, or Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire on the other, he's going to go with Gibbon's. And why is that? Well, the answer here matters when we think about how to go about reading the Silmarillion. And he gives us a hint with the allegory versus applicability dichotomy. The key to applicability, he says, resides in the freedom of the reader, while allegory is all about the proposed domination of the author. Translation: when you're reading Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Robert Louis Stevenson has something to say. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree with him, but with a story like that, he wants to get some point across to you. If you're reading a history of the Roman Empire or whatever, the history doesn't have you in mind at all. The historian might, but that's a different point. The point is, reading a history is going to present you with a lot of potential lessons from a micro or a macro perspective. And those lessons are essentially infinitely variable based on who's reading it, where they live, when they live, what mood they're in, what stage of life they're going through, and so on, and so on, and so on. Jekyll and Hyde, on the other hand, pretty much making the same point no matter who is reading it and when. Now, to put all my cards on the table, I actually don't have nearly the problem with allegory that Tolkien claims to have, but I can see where he's coming from. Anyway, back to the Silmarillion here. It might as well be called The Decline and Fall of the Noldorine Empire. This is a history of how the elves were created, how they climbed to the height of their power, and how they fell spectacularly into, well, if not ruin, then at least a state of decay. as you're reading that history, some chapters are going to take a wide view, with really no protagonist at all. It's just laying things out, telling you about the creation of the earth or where the various kingdoms were situated geographically. Other chapters will briefly give you a protagonist to follow, like Beren and Luthien or Turin Turambar, but those come and go fairly quickly, and they mostly just serve as pivotal moments in the larger history of the elves. But that's where that infinite applicability comes in. Some chapters will really resonate with you, others won't. I find chapter 14 to be a bit boring, to put it charitably, but I could read chapter 20 on a loop. And that's how you need to approach the Silmarillion, knowing full well that as a history, it will have stuff that will grab your attention and stuff that you'll be less interested in. Even just knowing that going in will go a long way to helping your enjoyment level. Now, let's talk briefly about the other thing that trips people up: the language, the prose, the dense way in which this history is told. This is the tougher one, since it's something a little bit more subjective. I can't expect everyone to be able or willing to overcome it. Basically, what it comes down to is, why did he have to use all the these and thous and weird sentence structures? And I get it, I do. Tolkien was a professor of Old and Middle English. That means he spent all day, every day, marinating in language that rings ancient in our ears. And that's the language that, in some measure at least, he was emulating here. Now, does that mean that all hope is lost and his aesthetic is simply not your thing, so why bother? No. Learning to appreciate style is like learning to appreciate fine food or drink. Just because you don't like that caviar right away doesn't mean you can't develop a taste for it. And if you do, you'll be all the richer for it. Or poorer, depending on how much you pay for your caviar, I guess. In this case, I don't have any concrete advice for you necessarily. Just come to it with a good dose of humility, a willingness to give it a good faith shot. My guess is that if you've gotten this far in this video, then you're going to be just fine in that regard. But if you are new to prose like this, then it's helpful to acknowledge how potentially tough this can be. And take a sentence like this one. If joyful is the fountain that rises in the sun, its springs are in the wells of sorrow unfathomable at the foundations of the earth. Whew. Now, if that sentence makes you want to claw your eyes out, I'm not sure I can help you. If it just seems impenetrable, then give it time. It can grow on you. With enough time, it will grow on you. And then the meaning of a sentence like that will start to unfold and the real treasures come out. In fact, in a future video, maybe we should tackle why Tolkien valued grief and sorrow so highly, but not today. Today, I'll end by encouraging you one more time to give the Silmarillion a shot. Know what you're getting into beforehand and be patient with it. And be patient with yourself. If you do, you'll be in a very good position to have a great experience. All right, thanks so much for watching, everybody, and a mega shout out to our amazing patrons. If you have other topics, Tolkien-centric or otherwise, that you would like to see covered on this channel, then hit me up in the comments below. If you liked the video, then like it, and don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.